Hello, I'm Mark Uncapher, sitting in for Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, should getting a COVID vaccination get you a tax break? The battle over school boundaries heats up again for Montgomery County schools. And what is a Maglev train, and should it be built in Maryland? A panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by education activist Cynthia Rubenstein and former membership director for the MDGOP, Phil Bell. Stay tuned for these stories and more on 21 This Week next. After living with COVID-imposed restrictions for 14 months, as the number of vaccinated increased, the light seems to be at the end of the tunnel and life can return to normal. Cynthia, Controller Peter Francho has suggested this week that a tax break might encourage more people to get vaccinated. Is that a good idea?
Well, that was a good quip from the comptroller, but I just read on my Twitter feed that our governor has announced that the lottery, the Maryland lottery will automatically distribute $40,000 each day to a random Marylander who has been vaccinated to July 1st. So the governor has upped the comptroller. And actually, I prefer the shot and a beer that a lot of local breweries are offering. I think that's going to capture the demographic that has been slower to become vaccinated.
Phil, CDC now says that the vaccinated can go maskless in more situations. Did the science change, or did just more enough people get vaccinated?
Well, first of all, some of us have been going maskless almost the entire time. But second, no, the science hasn't changed because there is no science. Let's not forget that no one in the United States has ever seen an original sample of COVID-19. Not only would China not provide it to us, they admit they destroyed it. Therefore, everything we have is built on something that was uploaded to the internet by the Chinese. Therefore, no, the science hasn't changed. What has changed is finally our political leaders, Senator Rand Paul and others, caught Anthony Fauci and other leaders in the big lie that they have been perpetuating, which is that a lot of what has gone on is theater, and a lot of what they have done is simply an example of CYA. They funded this so-called research that created COVID-19. They caused a lot of trouble because they didn't understand what was going on, what they had created, and therefore we paid the price. That's the only thing that's changed. But it's nice now. Thank you for allowing us to have our freedoms back.
Well, there were people getting sick, were they not? Now,
well, yes, Mark,
and it was spreading very quickly. Yeah.
Let's remember, every year there are plenty of viruses that go around. Many of them are coronaviruses and rhinoviruses, and people get sick from them. The difference between most years in 2020 is that we had no consistent testing program for them. We had no consistent reporting. We have people who die from pneumonia that's related to the common cold. We have people that die from pneumonia related to other coronaviruses. The difference, again, is in 2020, we decided to report and create a media frenzy over it. Again, if we don't have the original samples of whatever they claim came from Wuhan, how is it that we can tell exactly what is going on? Everything is supposition, complete supposition, and the so-called scientific community needs to be held to account for their failures and the misspending of the $6 billion that Anthony Fauci has every year.
I don't even know where to start with that.
Please start though. Go ahead.
That narrative. That is not science. That is conspiracy crap.
Conspiracy. If I tried to do this in science classes, Cynthia, you would have given me an F. Therefore, we should give Anthony Fauci a big fat F for his failure in so-called leadership.
Oh my Lord. I'm not even going to try.
Well, I got to ask you now, Cynthia, is Montgomery County opening up fast enough? Is it adjusting? We know where Phil is on that. That's for sure. Which is it
Yeah.
never should have shut down, right?
That's right. Absolutely not.
Yeah, and then we'd be looking
Go ahead,
at
Cynthia.
we'd be looking at more than 600,000 dead. We'd be looking at probably a couple million dead of COVID.
You know, this
To
is a
get
great
back to the question that I was asked, yes, Montgomery County is adjusting. People are no longer wearing masks outdoors. People are gathering at restaurants and getting together. My social life has opened up considerably in the last month. But there are adjustments and there are times, especially for businesses like restaurants, that are still phasing in and trying to staff up in order to meet new demands and accommodate their employees and clients at the same time. But it is going to mean adjustment, and there's a psychological adjustment for people who've been traumatized by the last 14 months. And some people will be more cautious as they adjust to the new freedoms.
What is there to be traumatized about? You spent 14 months sitting at home, ordering Amazon, and talking to people over Zoom. There is no trauma.
There is the trauma
stuff like you trying to perpetuate here today.
Let me make my statement, Phil. There is the trauma of people who care about people who have died, whose children have been sickened, whose relatives have been sickened, whose friends have been sickened, people who are dealing with long haul COVID, people who've been in the hospital, people who are who've been on oxygen in the hospital.
People die every day. People go on oxygen every day. It's unfortunate.
Well,
this is a pandemic.
Really
this is not normal. This is not system normal.
Again, take me back to
well, I think we've got to stop right there, I think, and move on to our next topic. But obviously, we have continue to have a bit of a disagreement there. This one, school boundaries, this is a report that was given to the Montgomery County Public Schools, which suggests that in modest changes, or relatively modest changes compared to some that had been promised, that diversity and easing of crowding can be done if the boundaries are rezoned by about 10% of students. Now, Cynthia, there's been a lot of hullabaloo in the past over school boundaries. Will these recommendations calm the furor?
No, they will not, because there is a residue of distrust in certain parts of the MCPS parent community, and there's just fear of change. Don't change anything, anytime, anywhere for anybody when it concerns school boundaries. But there is a valid point to make for this study. In order to save taxpayer dollars and to better distribute student populations between adjacent schools where it makes sense, and to make adjustments for increasing diversity. We are not talking about, this report is not talking about blowing up the school system. It's talking about making minor changes for the good of facilities use, and for what Montgomery County often touts is the value of diversity. But it will continue to be controversial, and it's now going to be up to the school board to take the information from the report and apply it, and that's what they will grapple with next year.
Now, some of what is driving this whole review has been this overcrowding. Obviously, equity and social distribution is one. So Phil, what about using some of the school choice tools to allow students in overcrowded schools to pick alternatives?
Well, Mark, thank you for bringing this issue to discuss, because one of the few things that I think is dumber than COVID-19 is the idea of school boundaries in the first place. If you have the opportunity, you have a child, you should have the opportunity to find what teachers, what program, what school is best for your child and send them there, and not be constrained by arbitrary boundaries that are drawn for overcrowding or equity or any of this, because what really matters is teaching our children and giving them the tools to be successful adults. So I'm completely in favor of not making small adjustments, but yes, blowing up the entire system and imposing school choice so that parents have this opportunity. Every child is unique. Everybody learns differently, and they should not be constrained simply because a few people a long time ago thought it would be a great idea to say, thou shalt attend school here.
Cynthia?
Well, I still believe in the horseman philosophy of free, non-sectarian public schools. Public schools have given this nation the strongest and best educated populace on the face of the earth. And that Montgomery County has a strong public school system that is touted for a reason. School choice is, I don't know what to call it.
Well, there are examples, let's
But-
say, across the border in the District of Columbia, close to just about half the student population are in
Yes, the
charter
Columbia, yes, and the
charter
District of
schools.
Columbia has charter schools, but it has not been illustrated or demonstrated that public charter schools produce any more well-educated students than public schools. And the DC charter schools have been compared to its public schools for years, and there is no measurable difference for the most part.
Cynthia, this doesn't make any sense at all. First of all, the very existence of the organization that you lead shows that outside input and that type of direction is beneficial to the educational process. So why should we tell parents that we are going to arbitrarily limit how they can educate their children, where they can go, and what they can do, simply because, again, a few people have decided that they are smarter and know best? Again, what we have done in the public schools for the most part is created a factory. And of course, the reason factories work is because you can build the same thing on assembly lines. But we come to these factories with differences and nuances and the like that are always completely ignored. Therefore, every year we have a lot of discussion about why schools are failing, why things don't get any better, and it goes on ad nauseum. It's its own cottage industry. So let's stop that now and actually make things better.
All right, well, you showed me a nation where students' parents, where there is no public school system and everybody has so-called choice, and and that nation is on a par with the United States with a public school system across the nation, strong public school systems across the nation.
So are what you're saying that the parents don't know what's best for their children?
Parents do, and parents make the choice to send their children to public school every day.
Or let them choose to
We
decide what public school
wouldn't
to
have
attend.
an MCPS system.
Let them choose to attend private schools if they want. Let them choose to attend charter schools if they
And
want.
they
If the
do.
public school system is so good, then guess what? It'll continue to win out, and you shouldn't have anything to fear.
And MCPS continues to win out.
But
Well, there
yet
are
you want
a
to foreclose
substantial-
on other opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, Cynthia, there are other school districts in Maryland. There are laws that permit alternative systems or a measure of choice that are in effect sponsored or approved by the school systems to be able to allow that. MCPS has avoided that. There have been a few exceptions and then they pulled back on that. Why not allow for more of that so that there can be some opportunity for students to choose alternatives other than the strict MCPS curriculum?
Well, students do make choices. MCPS does have choice. We have two consortiums in Montgomery County where students are able to choose their high school. And we have a consortium of middle schools where parents and students are able to choose their middle schools. So we do have a version of choice. And those are schools where students can choose certain areas of concentration and electives in certain areas in their middle school and in their high schools that suit them and that they and their parents choose. So we do have some semblance in two different consortiums for high school and in one for middle school.
So,
So,
you acknowledge it
Phil,
works.
Phil,
If
I'm
some of it is
assuming,
good,
Public,
why is it
within
more
the
of it
public
better?
school system, within the public school system.
right.
Again, if some choice is good, why is more of it not better? Why do you want to be the arbiter of how much there is? Why do you want to set the guidelines when, again, we recognize every child is different, every parent is different, and they are the ones who have the best idea of their direction as opposed to you and the people who run the schools?
Well, the people who run the schools and are the school board are MCPS parents. Every single member of the school board is an
Yeah,
MCPS parent or a former MCPS educator.
they're not the parents of my kids. Not that I have kids,
Well,
but if I
you
did,
can
they wouldn't be
run for school
parents. You
board.
get the idea.
Run for school board.
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to solve this right now, but we'll take a break, short break right now, and take up the topic of building a fast train between DC and Baltimore, which would just take some 15 minutes. Welcome back. The Baltimore-Washington Rapid Rail proposes building a, let me get this right, superconducting magnetic levitation train system, known as a Maglev train, to be able to go from Baltimore to DC in 15 minutes. That's 300 miles per hour. And it would only cost $5 billion to build. Now, Phil, I'm dying to ask you this question because I know you're a train aficionado. What is a Maglev train, and would it make sense for Maryland?
Well, thanks, Mark. So maglevs are actually pretty simple in terms of technology. Just take two opposing magnets and you can see how they can hover on top of each other. That's pretty much what a maglev does. And then it just moves forward and backward on that kind of, I guess, magnetic field, for lack of a better phrase. It's a very innovative technology. Some test systems have been built in China, in Japan, and other places. It's been very well discussed in the United States for years. In fact, one of the people that worked with me on one of my railroad projects before he passed away, he was actually working on doing just such a system between Baltimore and Washington. So it's something that was, and he's the guy that founded the auto train. So certainly very innovative and something that, would be very exciting to see. As far as would it work in this area, it is a good question. I don't think yet the market is entirely there, partly because the way that trains are the most effective is when you have an opportunity for a number of intermediate stops. 15 minutes between Baltimore and Washington is great, but if you even drive I-95, you notice while there's a lot of traffic jam closer to the Washington section, as you get closer to Baltimore, it thins out. That means that a lot of your end-to-end traffic isn't really there. Now, as time goes on, this could be the harbinger that creates that end-to-end traffic by having more people moving toward the Baltimore area. And while I haven't seen the studies for that, that will be what determines whether or not this makes sense. But on the whole, it's great to see that it's being discussed.
Cynthia, there's been community opposition to the Maglev train in Prince George's County, and transportation officials have come out against it. So what's wrong with it? What's the source of the opposition?
Well, there are several sources of opposition. There are a lot of federal properties that would be disturbed. There are also some natural resources or, that would be disturbed. There are communities that would be disturbed by the construction. And as Phil pointed up, Prince George's wouldn't benefit much from the Maglev because they're not planning for intermediate stops for Prince Georgians. The three stops are DC, BWI, and Baltimore would be the stops, but not much benefit for Prince Georgians. And the county council voted against it as well. Amtrak is also not so happy about this because it is competition for Amtrak. And Amtrak says, well, the Excella gets you there in 30 minutes to New York, between Baltimore and New York, and this is 15. So, the cost benefit. So those are some of the questions and the hesitations and opposition positions that are coming from Prince George's.
Now, Phil, as I understand it, part of the issue to get to 300 miles is to have a brand new right-of-way. In other words, it's got to be straighter and I guess obviously there's been a rail between Baltimore and Washington for a long time, but it does have some twists and turn to it. How realistic is it that you can construct something like that in as densely populated area as the Washington-Baltimore area?
Yeah, I think it is realistic because you do have a couple of options. One could follow some of the highways like your I-95 and the BW Parkway. The other could be a little bit further inland, although the question is how much further inland would you go? The most difficult would be the Montgomery County area, where exactly you would go through. Now, depending on, to what extent, how robust this would be, the amount of right-of-way you would need is actually not all that big. And the one benefit that you do have over traditional rail, which of course I love my traditional rail, but is that there's a lot less noise. So, there'll be fewer people complaining about locomotive idling or anything that normally goes into trains. And also, I doubt they'll be blowing a horn since no public crossings either. Talking
about building more infrastructure has been the rage this year. So why not spend money on an imaginative project like that? Phil, Cynthia, any thoughts on that?
Well, it's $13.8 billion, which is the current projected cost, and $5 million has been put forward for it. So it's a lot of money. And I'm going to go back to Phil again, when we're not really sure about whether the market is ready for it, whether it makes sense to sink into it.
Why spend public money on it? There's a great case to be made, developing real estate and having that get, and the private sector could fund that. That's something that's totally realistic. And then we could get to that market as opposed to digging into our tax dollars.
Well, there you go. I think you've got the last word there. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned for parting shots. And now with parting shots, we start with Phil Bell. Thank you, Mark. I gotta tell you, I feel naked. Let me fix that here. Oh boy, now I'm ready. My parting shot goes out to my favorite person, Anthony Fauci. Anthony, you have more degrees than a thermometer. You've blown a $6 billion budget year after year. You failed to prepare for a pandemic. You didn't have any kind of relationships with our consistent trading partners such as China that could let you know what kind of threats are coming to our country and what kind of threats are coming from our country to theirs. You've done a terrible job. You've done nothing, in fact, over the past 14 months, except appear on society pages and do a celebrity takeover of Julie Roberts' Twitter account. So my parting shot goes to you.
Oh, bless your heart. I'm going to talk about bugs today because we have an incredible science lesson going on outside. It's called The Return of the Cicadas. And it is a massive science lesson in entomology for children, adults, anybody. All you have to do is walk outdoors and see the life cycle of this incredibly interesting and fascinating insect, the cicadas. My shout out, my parting shot goes on behalf of cicadas today. I'm really enjoying them, and I'm looking forward to the din and their social life outside as they ensure the next generation for 17 years from now.
Well, thank you very much, Cynthia, and also Phil. Thank you to our audience for tuning in to 21 this week. Next week, we will have the return of the A-Team. Casey will be back in the moderator's seat, and maybe he'll be able to control things a little bit more. Thank you very much.